The winter wind howled through the empty streets of Pine Ridge as Mike Thompson locked up his small hardware store for the night. At 52, the lines on his face told stories of both joy and hardship. He pulled his worn jacket tighter around his body and hurried toward his truck, eager to get home where warmth awaited. As Mike fumbled with his keys in the poorly lit parking lot, a soft sound caught his attention. He paused, listening. There it was again, a quiet sniffling coming from behind the dumpster. Most people would have ignored it and continued on their way, especially on such a bitter cold night, but something made Mike hesitate. "Hello," he called out, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. "Is someone there?" Silence followed, then a slight movement. Mike stepped closer, squinting in the dim light. Huddled against the brick wall was a young girl, no older than 17. Her thin jacket offered little protection against the harsh January night. Her dark hair hung in tangles around her pale face, and her eyes, wide with fear, watched him carefully. "Are you okay?" Mike asked, keeping his distance to avoid frightening her further. The girl pulled her knees tighter to her chest. "I'm fine," she mumbled, though her shivering body suggested otherwise. Mike looked at the darkening sky. The weather report had warned of temperatures dropping below freezing tonight, with snow expected before morning. He couldn't leave her here. "I'm Mike," he said gently. "What's your name?" After a long pause, she answered, "Sarah." "Listen, Sarah, it's going to get dangerously cold tonight. Do you have somewhere to go?" She shook her head slightly, eyes fixed on the ground. Mike ran a hand through his graying hair, considering his options. His late wife Helen would have known exactly what to do. She always had a way with people in need. Since losing her to cancer 3 years ago, he had mostly kept to himself, but her voice seemed to whisper in his ear now. "Help her, Mike." "There's a diner just down the street," he said. "How about we get some hot food, and we can figure things out from there?" Sarah looked at him suspiciously. "Why would you help me?" It was a fair question. Mike thought about his own daughter, now grown and living across the country. "Because it's freezing, and no one should be out in this weather. No strings attached, just a warm meal." Something in his honest tone must have reassured her. After another moment of hesitation, Sarah slowly stood up, revealing how thin she truly was. Her clothes hung loosely on her frame, and Mike noticed a small backpack, her only possession. At the diner, they sat in a corner booth. The waitress, Doris, raised an eyebrow at the odd pair, but said nothing as she poured them coffee. Sarah wrapped her hands around the mug, soaking in its warmth. "So," Mike said after she had devoured a burger and fries, "you want to tell me why you're out there alone?" Sarah tensed. "I had to leave. It wasn't safe anymore." Mike didn't push. He had seen enough in his life to know that some stories needed time. "You got somewhere to stay tonight?" She shook her head, eyes downcast. Mike knew what Helen would say. He knew it was risky to invite a stranger home, but the alternative, leaving this girl to freeze, was unthinkable. "I have a spare room," he said finally. "Just until you figure things out. No pressure." Sarah studied his face, searching for deceit. Finding none, she nodded slowly. Neither one knew that this simple act of kindness would soon lead them both into a situation neither could have imagined. Mike's small two-bedroom house wasn't fancy, but it was neat and warm. As he unlocked the front door and flipped on the lights, Sarah hovered nervously on the porch, clutching her backpack to her chest. "You coming in?" Mike asked, holding the door open wider. Sarah nodded and stepped inside, her eyes darting around the living room. Family photos lined the walls, Mike with a smiling woman with kind eyes, and a younger girl who grew older in each picture. "That's Helen, my wife," Mike explained, noticing Sarah's gaze. "And our daughter, Emma. Helen passed away 3 years ago. Emma's in Seattle now, working as a nurse." Sarah nodded but said nothing. Her silence made Mike uneasy, but he reminded himself that the girl had probably been through more than he could imagine. "Bathroom's down the hall if you want to clean up," he said. "I'll show you the spare room." Mike led her to a small bedroom that had once been Emma's. He hadn't changed much since his daughter left for college years ago. The walls were still light blue, and a few old posters remained. "It's not much, but the bed's comfortable," Mike said. "I'll find you some clean towels." When Mike returned with towels and an old t-shirt of Emma's that might fit Sarah, the girl was standing exactly where he'd left her, as if afraid to touch anything. "Here you go," he said, placing the items on the bed. "The shower has good hot water. I'll be in the living room if you need anything." While Sarah showered, Mike sat in his recliner, wondering if he'd made a mistake. What did he really know about this girl? What if she stole from him in the night, or worse? But then he remembered her frightened eyes and thin frame. Whatever her story was, she needed help. The shower ran for a long time. When Sarah finally emerged, her hair was damp, and she wore Emma's old t-shirt with her own jeans. She looked younger now, more vulnerable. "Feel better?" Mike asked. She nodded, perching awkwardly on the edge of the couch. "Thank you," she said softly, the first words she'd spoken since the diner. "Hungry again?" Mike asked. When she hesitated, he added, "It's no trouble. I was going to make some eggs for myself anyway." In the kitchen, Mike scrambled eggs while Sarah sat at the small table. He placed a plate in front of her and watched as she ate quickly, like someone used to having food taken away. "So, Sarah," Mike said carefully, "how long have you been on the streets?" She paused, fork halfway to her mouth. "A while." "You've a family looking for you." Her hand tightened around the fork. "No, police." "No police," she said sharply, then lowered her voice. "Please, I haven't done anything wrong. I just needed to get away." Mike nodded, deciding not to push. "You're safe here tonight. We can figure out next steps in the morning." That night, as Mike lay in bed, he heard Sarah moving around in the spare room. The floor creaked as she paced back and forth. Eventually, all went quiet. Around 2 a.m., Mike woke to the sound of whimpering. He sat up, listening. It was coming from Sarah's room. A nightmare, probably. He debated whether to check on her, but decided against it. She needed her space. The next morning, Mike was surprised to find Sarah in the kitchen, awkwardly attempting to make coffee. "You didn't have to do that," Mike said. "I wanted to help," she replied, not meeting his eyes. "Since you're letting me stay." Mike noticed how she had already washed the dishes from the night before. She was trying to make herself useful, to prove her worth. "About that," Mike said, sitting down at the table. "You can stay a few days while we figure things out, but I need to know more about your situation if I'm going to help you." Sarah's shoulders tensed. For a moment, Mike thought she might bolt. Instead, she slowly rolled up her sleeve. "This is why I ran," she said. And that's when Mike saw it. Mike stared at Sarah's inner wrist. There, partially hidden under layers of faded bruises, was a small tattoo. It wasn't artistic or decorative, just a simple barcode with a series of numbers underneath. The skin around it was red and irritated, as if she had tried to scrub it away. "What is this?" Mike asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah quickly pulled her sleeve down. "It's how they mark us," she said. Her eyes darted toward the window, as if expecting someone to be watching. "So they can keep track." "Who's they?" Mike felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter morning. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. "The men who took me." Mike sat down heavily in the kitchen chair. Human trafficking. He'd seen stories on the news but had always thought of it as something distant, happening in big cities or foreign countries, not here in his small town. "How did you get away?" he asked. Sarah's hands trembled as she clutched her coffee mug. "They moved us to a new house 2 days ago. The guy watching us got drunk and passed out. I climbed out through a bathroom window." Her voice grew smaller. "I've been running ever since. They'll be looking for me." Mike felt sick. This girl wasn't just a runaway. She was escaping something truly dangerous. People who wouldn't hesitate to hurt her, or anyone who helped her. "Sarah, we need to call the police," he said gently. "No." The mug slipped from her hands, spilling coffee across the table. She didn't seem to notice. "They have people in the police. That's what they told us. If I go to the authorities, they'll find me and—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Mike grabbed a dish towel and mopped up the spilled coffee. His mind raced. Was she telling the truth about police involvement, or was that just something her captors told victims to keep them from seeking help? "How many others are there?" he asked. 7, maybe 8 girls now, Sarah replied. "They keep us in different houses, move us around a lot." She looked down at her hands. "Some girls have been with them for years." Mike's phone lay on the counter, just a few feet away. He could call 911 right now. But what if Sarah was right? What if there were corrupt officers involved? She might run before help arrived, putting herself in even more danger. "I need to show you something," Mike said suddenly. He walked to the living room bookshelf and pulled down a photo album. Flipping through the pages, he found what he was looking for, a picture of himself in uniform. "I was a deputy sheriff for 20 years before I opened the hardware store," he explained, showing Sarah the photo. "I still have friends on the force. Good people I trust completely." Sarah studied the photo, uncertainty written across her face. "There's a detective named Garcia," Mike continued. "She specializes in cases like yours. She doesn't work for the local department. She's with the State Bureau. If what you're saying is true, she'll know how to handle it safely." Sarah chewed her lower lip. "They'll hurt the other girls if they think I talked." "All the more reason to get help from people who know what they're doing," Mike said. "These men need to be stopped before they harm anyone else." Outside, snow had begun to fall, coating the world in white. Sarah walked to the window and pressed her palm against the cold glass. "I haven't felt safe in so long," she whispered. "Last night was the first time I slept without being afraid." Mike stood beside her, careful to keep his distance. "I promise you, Sarah, I will do everything I can to keep you safe, but we need help." Sarah's reflection in the window looked haunted, older than her years. Finally, she turned to face Mike. "Can you really trust this Detective Garcia?" she asked. Mike nodded. "With my life." Sarah took a deep breath. "Then call her, not 911, just her." Mike reached for his phone, knowing that whatever happened next would change both their lives forever. Mike's hands trembled slightly as he dialed Maria Garcia's number. 5 years had passed since they'd last spoken, at his retirement party from the sheriff's department. He stepped into the hallway, away from Sarah's watchful eyes. "Garcia," came the crisp, professional voice after 3 rings. "Maria, it's Mike Thompson." A pause. "Mike? Been a long time. Everything okay?" Mike lowered his voice. "I need your help, and I need it off the books, at least for now." He explained the situation: a trafficking victim with a barcode tattoo, claims of police corruption, and a group of girls still in danger. Garcia listened without interrupting. "I'll be there in an hour," she finally said. "Don't call anyone else. Don't let her leave." Mike returned to the kitchen where Sarah sat huddled in a chair, watching him with suspicious eyes. "She's coming," he said. "Just her, no one else." Sarah nodded but said nothing. Her entire body was tense, like a wild animal ready to flee at the slightest provocation. "We have some time before she gets here," Mike said gently. "Maybe you could tell me more. The more Detective Garcia knows, the better she can help the other girls." Sarah stared down at her hands. "What do you want to know? How did they take you?" She took a deep breath. "I was at a mall in Denver. This woman approached me, said she was a modeling agent. She seemed nice, professional, had business cards and everything." Sarah's voice became distant, as if she were talking about someone else. "She invited me to an audition at her office. When I got there, 2 men were waiting." Mike felt his stomach twist. "How long ago was this?" 8 months, Sarah said. "They move us around a lot. Colorado, Utah, here in Wyoming. Different houses, different towns. They sell us to men." Mike clenched his fists under the table. 20 years in law enforcement hadn't prepared him for the raw pain in this girl's voice. "The tattoo?" he asked. "They do it the first week." Sarah rubbed her wrist unconsciously. "It's how the customers know we're merchandise." She spat the last word. "Each girl has a different number code." Mike heard a car pulling into his driveway. Sarah jumped to her feet. "It's okay," Mike assured her, peering through the curtains. "It's Detective Garcia." Maria Garcia hadn't changed much in 5 years, still fit, with sharp eyes that noticed everything and a no-nonsense demeanor. She wore plain clothes, jeans, boots, and a heavy jacket with her badge clipped to her belt. Sarah shrank back as Garcia entered the house, positioning herself behind Mike. "Hello, Sarah," Garcia said, her voice softer than when she'd spoken to Mike. "I'm Detective Garcia. I'm here to help you." Sarah said nothing, her eyes fixed on the badge. "The badge scares you?" Garcia noted. "Mike told me you're worried about police involvement." Sarah nodded. "I need you to know something," Garcia continued, sitting down across from them. If there are corrupt officers helping these traffickers, I will find them and they will face justice. But first, my priority is getting you and the other girls to safety. How do I know I can trust you? Sarah asked. Garcia reached into her pocket and pulled out a small photo, sliding it across the table. This was my sister, Lucia. She disappeared 12 years ago when she was 16. 3 years later, we found her body. Garcia's professional facade cracked slightly. She had a barcode tattoo too. Sarah picked up the photo, studying the smiling teenage girl. This is why I do what I do, Garcia said simply. Now, I need you to tell me everything you remember. Addresses, names, how many men are involved, how many girls. Every detail could help save lives. Sarah looked from Garcia to Mike, then back at the photo in her hands. She took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice growing stronger with each word. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering their tracks, as inside the warm kitchen, Sarah began to map the darkness she had escaped. For 2 hours, Sarah talked while Detective Garcia recorded every detail. Mike made fresh coffee and watched in silent admiration as Garcia skillfully guided Sarah through her traumatic memories. The detective never pushed too hard, but didn't let Sarah skip important details either. The main house is on Ridge Road, Sarah explained, drawing a rough map on a piece of paper. It's set back from the road, behind trees. Blue with white shutters. There's a barn out back where they keep us when they're moving us. Garcia nodded, adding notes to her phone. How many men are usually there? 3, sometimes 4. The leader is called Marcus. He's tall with a scar here. Sarah traced a line along her jaw. He's the one who does the tattoos. Then there's Dex, who drives us around, and a big guy they call Tank who watches us. Any weapons? Garcia asked. Sarah nodded. Guns. I've seen at least 3 pistols and a shotgun. Mike watched Sarah's face as she spoke. The frightened girl from last night was transforming before his eyes. There was still fear, but also determination, a strength emerging from beneath layers of trauma. What about the 4th man? Garcia pressed. Sarah's hands began to tremble. He comes and goes. Wears nice suits. I think he's the one who finds the customers. She wrapped her arms around herself. He takes pictures of us for their website. Garcia's expression remained professional, but Mike saw a flash of rage in her eyes before she controlled it. You're doing great, Sarah, the detective said. Now, about the other girls. Names, ages, anything you can tell me. Sarah described 6 other girls between the ages of 14 and 19. As she spoke their names, Jess, Maya, Tina, Amber, Kayla, and a new girl called Zoe. Her voice grew stronger, as if speaking for those who couldn't speak for themselves. The youngest ones are kept at a different house most of the time, Sarah explained. I've only been there once, but it's in town somewhere, a white house with green trim, near train tracks. Garcia checked her watch. I need to make some calls. This operation will require careful coordination. She looked directly at Sarah. I believe you about possible police involvement. That's why we're going to bring in the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force rather than local units. Sarah's eyes widened. FBI, will I have to testify? Let's focus on getting everyone safe first, Garcia said gently. But yes, eventually, your testimony would be incredibly valuable. You'd be helping to put these men away for a very long time. Garcia stepped outside to make her calls, leaving Mike and Sarah alone in the kitchen. You're being very brave, Mike said quietly. Sarah stared out the window at the snow-covered yard. I don't feel brave. I feel scared. What if they find out I'm talking to police? What if they move the girls before the FBI can get there? Detective Garcia knows what she's doing, Mike assured her, though his own stomach was knotted with worry. These people will be careful. They won't rush in and risk anyone getting hurt. When Garcia returned, her face was grim but determined. The task force is mobilizing. They'll be here by evening. We're setting up surveillance on both locations first, to confirm the girls are there before making any moves. What about Sarah? Mike asked. Is she safe here? Garcia hesitated. Technically, we should move her to a secure location. But if these traffickers have connections, the fewer people who know her whereabouts, the better. She looked at Mike. Can she stay here until tonight? I'll have plainclothes officers nearby, but not visible. Before Mike could answer, Sarah spoke up. I trust Mike. A simple statement hung in the air between them. Mike felt the weight of her trust like a physical thing. She can stay as long as needed. Garcia nodded. I'll be back at 7 with the federal team. Sarah will need to guide them through layouts of both properties. She placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. You've taken the first step toward freedom, not just for yourself, but for all those girls. As Garcia left, Mike realized that his simple act of kindness had set in motion events that would change many lives forever. He only hoped they could save them all before it was too late. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. Detective Garcia had left them with a burner phone and strict instructions: stay away from windows, don't answer the door, and call immediately if anything seemed suspicious. Mike busied himself in the kitchen, cooking a hearty beef stew. The familiar routine helped calm his nerves. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, drawing detailed floor plans of both houses where the girls were kept. This door here leads to the basement, she explained, pointing to her sketch. That's where they keep us at the main house. There are 4 rooms down there. Mike stirred the stew, trying to keep his voice casual. How did you manage to escape? You mentioned a bathroom window? Sarah nodded, her pencil moving across the paper. We were at the smaller house in town. They only had one guy watching us that night, Dex. He'd been drinking. Her hand trembled slightly. He passed out on the couch. I waited until I was sure he wouldn't wake up, then squeezed through the bathroom window. It was tiny, but so am I now. They don't feed us much. Mike fought back a surge of anger. You're very brave, you know that? Sarah looked up, surprised. I left the others behind. You're helping them now, Mike said firmly. That takes more courage than most people have. A comfortable silence fell between them as the stew simmered. Outside, the early winter darkness had already settled over the town. Occasionally, Sarah would glance nervously at the window, though the curtains were drawn. What happens after? She asked suddenly. If they rescue the others, where will we all go? Mike ladled stew into bowls. Garcia mentioned a special program for trafficking survivors. Safe houses, counseling, medical care. And then what? Sarah's voice was small. I don't have anywhere to go. My mom's boyfriend was the one who... She trailed off. Mike set a bowl in front of her. One step at a time. Let's focus on tonight first. They ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The burner phone sat between them on the table, silent and ominous. At 6:30, Sarah suddenly stiffened. Car, she whispered, her spoon clattering against the bowl. Mike moved to the window and carefully peered through a crack in the curtains. A black sedan had parked across the street. His heart hammered against his ribs as he watched 2 men exit the vehicle. Stay low, he whispered to Sarah, who had already slid beneath the table. Mike grabbed the burner phone and quickly dialed Garcia. There are 2 men outside, he said quietly when she answered. Black sedan, no markings. Description? Garcia's voice was tense. Tall white guy, bald, shorter Hispanic male with a goatee, both wearing dark jackets. He heard Garcia's sharp intake of breath. That's Dex and Tank. They must have tracked her somehow. Our team is 15 minutes out. Can you stall them? Mike's mouth went dry. I'll try. He ended the call and turned to Sarah, who was shaking beneath the table. It's them, she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. Listen to me, Mike said, crouching beside her. Help is coming. I need you to go to my bedroom, lock the door, and hide in the closet. Don't come out for anyone but me or Garcia. What are you going to do? Sarah asked. Mike thought of his gun, locked in the safe in his closet. In 20 years as a deputy, he'd only drawn it twice. I'm going to buy us some time. Sarah clutched his arm. They'll kill you if they think you're helping me. They don't know that I know anything, Mike said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. To them, I'm just an old man who might have seen a runaway. Now go, quickly. As Sarah slipped down the hallway, Mike took a deep breath. He moved to the front door just as the first knock came, casual, almost friendly. He counted to 10, then opened the door with a confused expression. Can I help you, gentlemen? He asked, playing the role of an unsuspecting homeowner. The bald man smiled, but his eyes remained cold. Sorry to bother you, sir. We're looking for our niece. She ran away from home yesterday. Girl's got some mental health issues, you know? Family's worried sick. Mike leaned against the door frame, blocking their view into the house. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure they could hear it. "Haven't seen any young girls around here," he said with just the right amount of concern in his voice. "What does she look like?" As the men described Sarah, Mike silently prayed that help would arrive before his acting skills failed him. "Brunette, skinny, about this tall," the bald man, Dex, indicated with his hand. "Wearing a gray hoodie last we saw her. Named Sarah." Mike furrowed his brow, as if thinking hard. "Can't say I've seen anyone like that. Just me here since yesterday." The shorter man, Tank, stepped forward, his eyes scanning the interior of the house visible behind Mike. "Mind if we take a quick look around? Girl's medication is wearing off. Could be hiding anywhere." Mike felt sweat forming on his back despite the cold air. "You fellas have any ID? Or a police report? Can't be too careful these days." Dex's friendly smile tightened. "No police. Family matter. Her mother's worried sick." "Sorry," Mike said, beginning to close the door. "Without some official." Tank suddenly shoved his boot into the doorway, preventing it from closing. "Listen, old man. We know she's been in this neighborhood. Why don't you step aside?" Mike's deputy training kicked in. He assessed both men quickly. Dex was lean but muscular, likely quick. Tank was powerfully built, probably slower but dangerously strong. The bulge under Tank's jacket suggested a weapon. "I think you boys should leave," Mike said, his voice dropping to the authoritative tone he'd used during traffic stops and bar fights years ago. "Now." Dex's face darkened. "You're making a mistake, Grandpa." In the distance, Mike heard the faint wail of sirens. The men heard it too, their heads turning toward the sound. "That for us?" Tank growled, his hand moving toward his jacket. Before Mike could answer, the sound of breaking glass came from the back of the house. All three men froze. "Nobody else home, huh?" Dex sneered. Mike's blood ran cold. Sarah must have panicked and tried to escape through a window. With remarkable speed for his size, Tank shoved past Mike, knocking him against the wall. Dex followed, both men racing toward the sound. Mike scrambled to his feet and rushed to his bedroom. The safe. He needed his gun. His fingers trembled as he punched in the code, grabbed the revolver, and checked that it was loaded. He could hear the men tearing through the house, shouting Sarah's name. Mike moved down the hallway, gun raised. The sirens were getting louder now, but still not close enough. Mike found them in the kitchen. Sarah had indeed broken the window, but she hadn't fled. She'd armed herself with a large shard of glass and was backed against the refrigerator. Blood dripped from her palm where the glass had cut her. "Step away from her," Mike commanded, his revolver pointed at Tank's back. Both men turned. Tank's hand was indeed on a pistol, half drawn from his waistband. "Drop it," Mike ordered. Slowly. Tank hesitated, his eyes calculating. "You won't shoot, old man?" 20 years with the sheriff's department says I will," Mike replied steadily. "And I still qualify expert every year at the range." Uncertainty flickered across Tank's face. The sirens were very close now. "Those are our friends," Mike continued. "Drop the gun and get on your knees. Both of you." For a moment, the kitchen was frozen in a deadly tableau. Mike with his revolver, Tank with his hand on his pistol, Dex tensed to spring, and Sarah gripping her glass weapon with bloody fingers. Then Tank made his decision. In one fluid motion, he drew his pistol. The sound of Mike's revolver was deafening in the small kitchen. Tank stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder, his unfired pistol clattering to the floor. Dex raised his hands immediately. "On your knees," Mike shouted, his ears ringing. "Now." Outside, car doors slammed. Footsteps pounded up the driveway. "In here," Sarah screamed. "Help us." The kitchen door burst open as Garcia led a team of agents into the room, weapons drawn. "FBI, everybody freeze." In seconds, both men were face down on the floor, being handcuffed. Mike lowered his revolver, his hands shaking with adrenaline. An agent took the gun while another led him to a chair. "Are you hurt?" Garcia asked, her eyes moving from Mike to Sarah. "Just her hand," Mike said, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. "She cut it on the glass." As a medic tended to Sarah's bleeding palm, Garcia squeezed Mike's shoulder. "The raid teams just hit both locations. All 6 girls are safe. We got them all, Mike. We got them all." The kitchen filled with activity, agents speaking into radios, medics treating Tank's shoulder wound, others processing the scene. Through it all, Mike watched Sarah. Her face was pale, but composed as she answered an agent's questions. When their eyes met across the chaotic room, she gave him the smallest of smiles. It was over. 6 months passed like the changing seasons. Winter had given way to spring, and spring had blossomed into early summer. Mike sat on his porch swing, watching the evening light paint the mountains gold. The events of that snowy January night sometimes felt like a distant dream, but the changes they brought were very real. The local newspaper lay folded beside him. The headline read, "Trafficking ringleaders sentenced. Marcus Delaney gets life without parole." Mike had attended every day of the trial, sitting in silent support as Sarah and the other girls testified. Their courage had moved the jury to tears. All 8 men involved, including a corrupt police officer from a neighboring county, were now behind bars. The sound of a car approaching drew Mike's attention. A blue sedan pulled into his driveway, and he smiled as he recognized Garcia behind the wheel. She wasn't alone. Sarah stepped out of the passenger side, looking almost like a different person from the frightened girl he found behind his store. Her hair was cut short now, framing a face that had filled out with proper nutrition. She wore jeans and a simple t-shirt with the logo of the rehabilitation center where she'd spent the past months. "Mike," she called, hurrying up the path. She embraced him warmly, something she couldn't bear to do in those early days when any physical contact would make her flinch. "Look at you," Mike said, stepping back to take her in. "You look healthy." "Feeling better every day," Sarah replied. Though her smile was genuine, her eyes still carried shadows of her past. The counselors had told Mike that healing would take years, not months, but she was on her way. Garcia joined them on the porch, carrying a small cake box. "Thought we should celebrate," she said. "Sarah's big news." They settled in Mike's kitchen, the same room where they had faced down Tank and Dex, though Mike had since repainted and rearranged everything to erase those memories. "I got accepted," Sarah announced as they ate cake. "The Survivor Scholarship Program. I start community college in the fall." "Psychology," Garcia added. "She wants to become a counselor for trauma survivors." Pride swelled in Mike's chest. "That's wonderful, Sarah." "It wouldn't have happened without you," she said quietly. "I keep thinking about that night. How close I came to not knocking on your store door. How many things had to go right for me to be sitting here now." Mike thought about how easily he could have walked past the dumpster, ignoring the sounds. One small choice had changed everything. "The other girls are doing okay too," Sarah continued. "Jess is back with her family. Tina and Maya are at the same group home. Amber's aunt took her in." Her voice softened. "Zoe was reunited with her parents yesterday. They've been searching for her for 2 years." Garcia's phone buzzed. She checked it and stood up. "I need to take this. Work never stops." When she stepped outside, Sarah turned to Mike with a serious expression. "There's something else I wanted to tell you," she said. "I found my brother. He's been looking for me since I disappeared. Our mom." She hesitated. "She died last year, but Jason never stopped searching. He's 25 now, has his own place in Colorado." "Are you going to live with him?" Mike asked, feeling a strange mix of happiness for her and sadness for himself. Sarah nodded. "After my first semester, he's fixing up a room for me." She reached across the table and took Mike's hand. "But I'll visit. A lot. If that's okay." Mike squeezed her hand gently. "More than okay. This will always be a home for you." Garcia returned, slipping her phone into her pocket. "Ready, Sarah? We should get you back before curfew." As they walked to the car, the setting sun bathed everything in warm light. Sarah stopped and turned back to Mike. "You know what the counselor told me?" She said sometimes the worst circumstances bring out the best in humanity. That for every person who wants to hurt others, there's someone willing to help. Sarah's eyes shone with ancient tears. "You're the proof of that, Mike." Mike watched the blue sedan drive away, Sarah waving from the window until they turned the corner. He returned to his porch swing, feeling the weight of solitude, but also the lightness of knowing he had made a difference. Some choices, he reflected, change not just one life but many. One cold night, one act of kindness, and 7 young women now had a chance at a future. The world could be a terrible place. He knew that better than most, but it could also be wonderful, full of second chances and new beginnings. As darkness fell, Mike looked up at the stars and whispered a quiet thank you to the universe for putting him in the right place at the right time and for giving him the courage to open that door.